Welcome back. My next guest is our very own Luke Jones, always doing great things on WNST and then some. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you doing, my friend? Lots to talk about since the last time you and I talked a week ago. Tons to talk about here on the local sports scene.
Yeah, without question, Luke, Ravens much more settled than they were a few weeks ago. Lamar Jackson under contract. We got a new cornerback to talk about. Orioles doing great things at 20 and 10. So the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's begin with the obvious of what we've been talking about for the better part of a little over 2 years, off and on. Maybe not every single week, but probably most weeks, at least as garnered a mention. And it's Lamar Jackson. And look, you and I talked when we recorded our segment last week. I think it was Thursday morning, Wednesday, something like that. And at that point in time, there had been some tweets, a SpongeBob SquarePants tweet, and there had been some conjecture, some speculation as far as what that meant. And by the way, there had been tweets throughout the offseason in different times that amounted to nothing. So I think some skepticism was warranted. But lo and behold, just a few hours before the draft, the Ravens come to terms with Lamar for a 5-year, $260 million deal, 185 million guaranteed with injury, and very much a deal that I think if you're Eric DeCosta, you're looking at Howie Roseman and Jalen Hurts and probably saying thank you, probably sending a fine bottle of wine because it feels like that was kind of the last critical data point, price point, whatever you want to call it, to kind of put the Deshaun Watson deal in the outlier category for good. And for whatever reason, and we'll hear from Lamar, we're going to hear his press conference here a week after he agrees to terms. And I'm guessing he's not going to say a whole lot because Lamar generally doesn't say a whole lot from a media standpoint. But, for whatever reason, Lamar decided, okay, now's the time. And the Ravens got a deal done with him. He's the highest paid player in NFL history, at least for the time being. I'm sure until Joe Burrow gets his deal here at some point in the not too distant future. But the important thing is they got it done. The Ravens were patient. They never wavered. While we certainly talked about the possibility of a trade or something along those lines, I still think this was ultimately what they wanted, getting Lamar Jackson at a price that was very fair from a traditional market standpoint. And he's their quarterback, at least under contract for the next 5 years. And we'll see how things play out. But certainly nice to have a resolution for this thing after so many weeks, months, and even going on years of speculation of why this was taking so long to get done.
Well, in retrospect, Luke, I thought it was brilliant on his part, not just to dig his heels in, but to also demand that they improve the wide receiver room, right? So that seemed to be accurate in regard to demands. He demanded both, according to sources, Hopkins and also OBJ, and they explained to him there's not enough money to sign both. We'll get one for you, but I think it was smart on his part, not just to get the contract, but to ensure that they surrounded him with some weapons. And even with the Zay Flowers pick, which I wanted a cornerback, they addressed it with Rock Scene for the moment. But with OBJ and a 1 year deal, Rashard Bateman with his contract coming up and his injury history, I thought it was smart to solidify that wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think so too. And look, I mean, how much was that really a factor for him signing? I think it sounds good. I think it's a way for Lamar to save some face, quite frankly, but because he knew he wasn't going to get the full guarantee like Watson got at signing. So, if that was a way to appease him a little bit, allow him to get a little more of a win. And look, I mean, the Ravens, they needed to upgrade wide receiver regardless. I mean, and they said as much at the start of the offseason. So, they had to make a move, whether it was going to be Beckham, whether it was going to be Hopkins, whether it was going to be drafting two wide receivers over the weekend. They had to do it. But yeah, the fact that there at least were some rumors and some smoke about Lamar wanting Beckham specifically, that's something that they had talked about in the past, and they have a relationship. I'm not saying they're best friends, but clearly they knew each other and wanted to play together. And I think that was a big reason why Odell Beckham uh, was interested in the Ravens. I think the $15 million guaranteed certainly helped, and that to me was a sign that it wasn't a guarantee at that point in time that Lamar was going to be back. But again, from the moment that they made that deal, it kind of felt like that warmed the waters a little bit from a negotiating standpoint. And then again, for me, I look at the Jalen Hurts deal. It's one thing to talk about Russell Wilson, who was older. It's one thing to talk about Kyler Murray, who's not as accomplished as Lamar Jackson. It's one thing to talk about, Derek Carr. Go down the list of the quarterback deals that had been done since the Watson deal. But Jalen Hurts, and look, anyone can, Coke or Pepsi, right? Take your pick if you want Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson at this point. Jalen Hurts has played at a higher level more recently, but Lamar Jackson's peak and has done it longer than Jalen Hurts. So whether you want to say Hurts is better than Lamar or Lamar is better than Hurts, they were very comparable from a compensation standpoint, from a contractual standpoint, when you're talking about an extension. So when he got the extension that he got from the Philadelphia Eagles, to me, if you're Lamar Jackson, if you're anyone looking at this thing, short of him taking on a boatload of additional risk and playing on the tag and not knowing what's going to happen, the fact that he's already been injured the last couple years and not been able to finish the season, I think he looked at this and said, you know what, that's pretty comparable to what the Ravens were offering last summer. Let's not, we're getting more money now than Josh Allen got a couple years ago, or Patrick Mahomes got a couple years ago. But let's not push this too far. And I'm guessing at that point, Lamar said, all right, let's make a deal, and they got it done. Which, again, lots of frustration, lots of uncertainty leading up to this point. But at the end of the day, the Ravens have their quarterback for the next 5 years, and Lamar Jackson gets the payday that he all along was deserving of. Again, say what you want about where he ranks. He ranks up there to be in that category when you're up. When it's your turn to get paid, you're going to be at the top of the food chain, at least for a little while. And I said all along, I would not have hesitated or disqualified him whatsoever from getting a traditional top of the market quarterback deal like he ultimately got.
Yeah, I mean, after 61 regular season games, he's won 45. He ranks way up there in NFL history at number 6. Guys in front of him, guys like Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes. So that's something you can't ignore. Something that I'm sure Steve Bisciotti didn't ignore is the team's record with him and without him. Of course, it's a complementary game with defense, special teams, etc. But one can't ignore the production and the record with Lamar Jackson under center. 4 of the last 5 years, the team has been in the playoffs. Had a really good chance the last 2 seasons before Lamar Jackson got hurt. Even had a great chance against the Bengals. But I'm excited to see what this offense looks like under Todd Monken's direction. I'm looking forward to see what Lamar Jackson looks like out of the phone booth. I feel like Greg Roman, although he was well-intended, kind of put Lamar in the phone booth now with scheming wide receivers open, better personnel. J.K. Dobbins in the contract year, lots to prove for him. Rashad Bateman, again, lots to prove for him. A lot of hungry guys on this roster, Luke.
No question. And I mean, as I alluded to in my latest 12 Ravens thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com, look, I mean, you've got the franchise quarterback under contract. You've pumped resources into the wide receiver position. You have one of the very best tight ends in football and 2 complementary tight ends behind him who flashed as rookies. You have an offensive line that returns all but 1 starter. You have a new offensive coordinator who has been known, not so much at Georgia because of how they played, but in the past of having effective passing games and having this reputation for catering his system to the strengths of the personnel. That to me, Dennis, sounds like no more excuses for this offense to be not just good in the regular season, not just really good in the regular season, not just being a good running game, not just being a good play action passing game. There are no more excuses for this offense to not be great and to not be a team that can make a deep run in January. And the pressure's on at this point. Let's be clear about this. I mean, the focus is back on the field, and it's not just Lamar, it's everyone. This entire young core of players, the only guy left from Super Bowl 47 now is Justin Tucker. I mean, he's the kicker. No disrespect, but he's the kicker. So you have a young core, including other All-Pro players, including other Pro Bowl players who their January legacy is really forgettable. And at this point in time, that's not to say Lamar didn't deserve a payday or Marlon Humphrey didn't deserve his bag or Ronnie Stanley or Mark Andrews, etc. But it's time to go. It's time to, it's great to talk about regular season success and numbers and all of that, but legacies are defined in January. And when you look at how this is now presently constructed, I don't see any excuse. Losing Ben Powers is not, should not be that big of a deal to them, whether it's Ben Cleveland or whether it's, Patrick McCary or they go get a veteran or something like that to play left guard. I mean, especially between Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum. So
Mhm.
I look at the current state of this offense now with Lamar locked up for the next 5 years and happy and paid, and the wide receiver upgrades made. And what they already had in place. You mentioned J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. I mean, both those guys are in the contract year. I don't think they're abandoning the run entirely by any means. So everything is in place for this offense to be great and this offense to be able to go toe to toe with a Kansas City or a Buffalo or a Cincinnati. And understanding that defense, yeah, defense factors in there. I'm not ignoring that, but everything about this is now set up for this offense to thrive. And all those questions that may have been there so fair, but the legitimate ones, everything should be in place now for him to and this offense to completely take off and be anything they want to be at this point in time, including throwing the ball through the air with success. So we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, health, but again, with this contract, it's not just expectations for Lamar Jackson, but it's expectations for the entire offense, for the entire football team. It's time to go. Again, they've had one playoff win in what the last 9 years at this point in time. So it's time to go and to, I'm not saying you must win the Super Bowl this coming season, but that's the goal, right? I mean, that's the goal to be playing into deep into January. And now let's face it, they haven't been able to get out of the divisional round since they won Super Bowl 47.
Yeah, no question about it, Luke. And with the Lamar Jackson contract now done, and I don't know if they'll announce today. Of course, we're taping the show before the 12:30 press conference. The structure of the contract, the Ravens still haven't submitted the contract, so we can see what the structure of it is. If there's any cap space available, for instance, this year, where they can still maybe perhaps still bring in a Marcus Peters, Justin Houston, Carlos Dunlap, Leonard Floyd, whoever else is out there to help out that defense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it's structured. I mean, from where his cap number was on the franchise tag, which was $32.4 million, I could definitely envision some space being created there. I think that's reasonable. I do, however, want to remind that these cap numbers are going to get really big. I mean, we're talking about $52 million per year average annual value. So you do want to try to keep a flatter structure as much as you can. I think, and that's generally been how the Ravens have operated. Now, of course, this offseason we've seen them pivot using voidable years and some other mechanisms that kick the can down the road a little bit. And obviously, there'll be there's the expectation that the cap will continue to increase over the years with the TV money and all that stuff just getting more and more lucrative. So, but I think there's going to be an opportunity for a move to be made. I look at corner now. I like the Rock Yassin signing. But I will also note he is someone who has had some durability concerns. So, I mean, he played 11 games last year, played 13 2 years ago with Indianapolis, same thing in 2020. And, he played all but one game his rookie year. So since his rookie year in 2019, he's played no more than 13 games per year. So you need depth. And a big part of that, yes, is going to come down to Brandon Stevens and especially Demarion Williams and Jalen Armour Davis, hopefully taking a step forward that those guys can look like viable 4, 5, 6 kind of corners. They drafted Caillou Blue Kelly, who I think is an interesting name long term, but as a fifth
Mhm.
round pick, not someone you're going to pencil in to be a guy that's going to do anything more than play on special teams as a rookie. So, I think there's still a potential move to be made there at some point in time. You mentioned Marcus Peters, whether it's him, whether it's another corner that shakes loose, we've talked about Kyle Fuller. So, I would not at all be shocked to see them add a veteran. And keep in mind, there's also a possibility that you could talk about adding a safety, and then you could use Kyle Hamilton at the nickel and in certain sub packages as that was kind of his primary role last year. So I think there's a potential for that. I definitely look at the pass rush at this point in time. I think Tavius Robinson was a really interesting name to add to the mix in the fourth round, and even drew some comparisons to how the Ravens kind of viewed Zadarius Smith when they drafted him, a guy that could rush from the edge or slide inside, play a little three technique when it comes to sub packages and different rush packages of that nature. But I still look at that group and say, you know, could you benefit from a Justin Houston type of addition at some point between now and training camp? And could be Justin Houston. He really enjoyed his time here, and Eric DeCosta left that door open and even acknowledged at the season-ending press conference back in January that Justin Houston was someone that could be a June or July signing like he was last year. So I think that's certainly something that's on the table. I do think they'll have some modest flexibility created by this. I don't think it's lucrative amounts, and certainly they can redo some deals if the right opportunity presents itself. But it was nice to get Rock Ya-Sin, because after the draft, when the Ravens did not draft a corner until the fifth round, that was the roster need that stood out like a sore thumb, like that they clearly needed to add at least one corner of note. And I'm with you. I would still very much look to see if they can add another corner, a veteran. You want to have that, you want to strike that balance, right? You want to give young guys an opportunity to grow and develop and play, but at the same time, you want that to be warranted. You don't want to just put a guy out there because that's all you have. You want it to be a case where that player forces his way onto the field. So I think that's where they're trying to figure this out. So they've got a lot of inventory at corner, but the question for me at this point is, do they have enough quality depth? Rock Ya-Sin went a long way in solving that. In my mind, number two corner, that outside corner opposite Marlon Humphrey, projected starter, but there's still the nickel, and there's still some depth questions there that I think Brandon Stevens took a nice step last year.
Mm-hmm.
I feel better about him. I'd feel good about him as my number four, let's say, but still looking for some of those other young guys to emerge. And, we're really not going to know until I would say get into training camp, but you really don't know until they're called upon. You hope it doesn't happen, but we know history suggests, for you to make it through a season and not have that be a problem, you really do need at least 4 or 5 really quality corners from a depth standpoint.
And then there's the Patrick Queen situation. Ravens not picking up his fifth-year option, which was really no surprise. And he also had plenty of company at that, and lots of teams didn't pick up players as fifth-year option. But I expect Patrick to play next to Roquan Smith this year and have a heck of a year in order to increase his market value when he hits free agency next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the reality. I think, look, I can empathize with him feeling frustrated. I mean,
Sure.
he is coming off of his best season after an up and down first couple years in the league. But the reality was, from the moment the Ravens acquired Roquan Smith, and certainly when they gave him a $100 million contract, I think it was obvious that Patrick Queen's time was short in Baltimore. I just think that's the reality. Barring something strange, barring an injury or him not having a great year and he re-signs on the cheap or something like that, I think that the writing was on the wall. And then when they took Trenton Simpson from Clemson in the third round, I think it was, kind of fait accompli as far as certainly his rookie, his fifth year options. So, but he has plenty of motivation here. I mean, when
Sure
you're
he
talking
does.
about someone at inside linebacker at the Mike spot in Roquan Smith, that is that quote force multiplier that Eric DeCosta has described him as. You think back to memories of the guys that played next to Ray Lewis, and I'm not saying that Roquan Smith is Ray Lewis. He's not, but when he can have a similar kind of impact in terms of making guys better and whoever's lining up against him, having a little less on their plate and being able to, maybe freelance a little more, use their speed. We know Patrick Queen's a really good blitzer. We've even seen him line up on the edge on occasion. Maybe we see a little more of that this year as well, which could factor into the pass rush question as well. But I think if you look at him, you have no shortage of motivation, even if you're a little angry at the Ravens. That's okay, right? As long as it's not being a malcontent, as long as it's not compromising your work.
Sure.
I don't mind a player that's a little ticked off, but he has every motivation to come in, play great, have a good year, be part of a defense that I think is going to be really, really good, and make a deep playoff run. And then chances are there'll be I'm not going to say it's going to be Roquan Smith money, but there's going to be a really good payday out there for Patrick Queen. And if you're the Ravens, you look at it through that lens. he has more value to your 2023 defense right now than whatever potential trade you can make.
Sure.
And okay, maybe there's a scenario if some team dangles a nickel corner that you think is a great fit for your defense and you can kind of answer that question, I'll hear that. But I really think it would have to be a unique return coming because, this is where we get into positional value. An off-ball linebacker entering the last year of his rookie contract, it's probably not going to fetch much in
Right.
a trade. So much rather play it out. You have a motivated Patrick Queen playing next to Roquan Smith. Trenton Simpson can learn for a year because his skills kind of remind you a little bit of Patrick Queen, and we saw how Patrick Queen, struggled his first year or two to really get acclimated. So let that play out, and if he has a great year, he is too expensive for you to keep because now you're talking about a $260 million quarterback contract on top of all the other deals you have and the investment made in Roquan Smith. You let him walk, and then there's a decent shot. You can say, get a fourth round comp pick, which probably is, about what you'd be looking to get, right now, if that, for him for the 2023 season, if you were to trade him. So to me, it would have to be a pretty unique return, a pretty unique trade offer for me to really, really entertain the idea of trading him, unless it was a case where he was that much of a malcontent and that it wasn't going to work from a team culture standpoint. Which at this point I'm not ready to say that about Patrick Queen.
And of course, on the flip side of the ball, we have J.K. Dobbins' uh, contract year as well for him. He plays a position, unfortunately, that had been devalued the last 5-10 years or so, as teams have realized that they can pick up decent running backs in the latter rounds in day 3 of the draft. And even if he has an outstanding year, he had ACL 2 years ago. He had ACL in college. I mean, he's been banged up a bit, has some wear and tear on him. And as a former running back myself, I feel sorry for running backs and what they have to go through to earn that contract after the rookie deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what this running game looks like in general, but specifically with J.K. Dobbins, who made very clear he was unhappy with his usage at the end of last year, which I think he had some points, but at the same time, I think it was also a case of, hey, you even had to get your knee scoped in the middle of the season. So, I wouldn't be too hard on a coaching
Sure.
staff that, is trying to manage your workload and whatnot. But, what that looks like with Todd Monken, does he view Dobbins as a little more of a feature back? Do we see Dobbins more involved as a receiver out of the backfield? And how does that pertain to his future? I mean, you know me, Dennis. I'm definitely a guy who doesn't shy away from paying attention to analytics and thinking about things, with a more modern viewpoint.
Hmm.
I'm really not. I'm really not keen on giving running backs legit, serious, long-term
Sure.
kind of contracts. So, even if J.K. Dobbins has a big year this year, I struggle with that, especially when
Right.
you're just talking about, some of the factors that you just laid out. I mean, you're talking about someone who, he's come back from the knee and he looked great at the end of last season. I mean, he averaged what, close to 7 yards a carry his last 4 regular season games. But, how's that going to age? How is his knee going to age? How is that contract going to age when you're talking about all these other needs that you're going to have, at various positions? And still coming back to, the running game is still driven by Lamar Jackson. Even if he's not going to run as much, his presence will still be that important, and this offensive line. So that's where I look at this thing and say, hey, I mean, J.K. Dobbins has plenty of motivation, but I will say this: I'm certainly not in any kind of a rush to, sign him to a long-term contract or anything like that. I'm much assume just let this thing play out and then you kind of see where you go from there.
Yeah, and even if he has a great year, I can't see a huge market for him, unlike any other running back in his position. I mean, it's the worst position to be, be as a rookie looking for that second deal.
It is, and I think everyone thinks their guy's going to be different, right? I mean, we saw this with Carolina with Christian McCaffrey a few
Sure.
years ago, and certainly Zeke Elliott. We saw how that played out. I mean, guys that, yeah, look, we're talking about great running backs. I'm not trying to be disparaging of the talent. I mean, these are really,
Oh,
really good to great running backs we talk about, but for the most part, you look at these long term. and again, I'm not talking like the Mark Ingram signing the
Uh,
Ravens made a few years ago. I'm talking
right.
about,
Look at
those top tier deals.
Todd Gurley is a great example, a
Yeah.
recent
Oh,
example. So
sure.
that's what
Right. I
happened.
mean, yeah, I mean, out of football, right? I mean, it's just, so it's just, it's really tough through that lens to look at that and try to justify putting those types of resources into that position. I'd much rather take that money and pump it into my offensive line, keeping another offensive lineman around or signing whatever you need at that point in time, just from a philosophical standpoint. So, but it's going to be fascinating. Again, I'll remind everyone, and I've scrimmaged and kind of sparred with Nestor about this over and over, that I don't think the Ravens are suddenly going to throw it 45 times a game. I don't think it's going to be that extreme.
I agree.
I think they're going to throw more. I think it's going to be much more balanced, but at the same time, this is still a John Harbaugh led football team. I don't think they're going to abandon the run. The run is still their big strength until they prove that their passing game, with these new toys and with Monken leading the system, truly is that elite. So, I think J.K. Dobbins could have a big year. I think Gus Edwards could, have a strong year. It's going to be interesting to see what Patrick Ricard's role is in all of this. Certainly don't expect him to be playing as much. I think you're going to see a lot more 11 personnel
Right.
on the field than we've seen, certainly last year, where the Ravens were extraordinarily low in three wide receiver sets. So, I think there's a lot of curiosity here, but I think there's a lot of potential as well. But how that shakes out in terms of contracts and everything will be interesting. That's why, and we'll see, I'm really hesitant to comment on rookie free agents because I know there have been names that are reported that ultimately end up not signing, or they're just tryouts and they're not signed. But be interested to see what other running backs the Ravens bring into camp. Not so much that they're going to be a guy that plays a lot this year, but keeping in mind, Dobbins is going to be a free agent. Gus Edwards is going to be a free agent. Justice Hill's on a 2-year deal, but he's a number 3
Right.
back at best, we assume. So be interesting to see if maybe there is a diamond in the rough that they can add to that mix. Even if it's on the practice squad to kind of be a name that can factor into their future equation there. Because again, definitely some questions long term at the running back position, even though I feel like they're in good shape for 2023.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think in 2024 they'll probably have to draft a running back in day 3, maybe even late in day 2. You got to have one. I mean, we go back to the days that we had some journeymen in that position, and it does hurt the team when you don't have a real bell cow running back there.
Yeah, I mean it. I think the football analytics community has said for years running backs don't matter. I don't think that's the right way to put it. In fact, I
That's
saw
not
Aaron
true.
Schatz from Football Outsiders, who is kind of one of the godfathers of the football analytics community. He coined it as, I wish it wasn't football, or I wish it wasn't running backs don't matter as much as offensive line really, really matters when it comes to the running game. And I think that's really what the lesson is more than anything else. So yeah, I'm not a big proponent of giving lucrative money to running backs, but take that money, not saying for owners to save it, put it into your offensive line to help you both with the run and in pass protection, of course.
Yeah, there's no question about that. It is going to be interesting to see what this team does look like with Todd Monken leading that offense. Like you, I do think he'll run the ball. He likes to run the ball. He understands if what happens to your offense, your passing game when you have an effective running game. It just opens up everything else. But I'm excited to see Lamar Jackson out of the phone booth, so to speak. Get him in space. Like to see the receivers get schemed open. That way he has some easier throws to make and watch his offense score some points versus trying to limit the other team's possession. I think they lost their focus in that regard. I think the Greg Roman got so caught up in time of possession he forgot the most important thing, whether you run the ball or passing the ball, is to come away with some points.
Come away with points and more specifically touchdowns.
Touchdowns. There you go.
Look,
And when you go
love
for it,
just
look, when you go for the fourth and short in the red zone and you come away with nothing, it really kills you. You talk about analytics.
Yeah, I mean, it kills you because that doesn't work. It's the right decision, but if you can't execute, then we have to have a different conversation
Right.
about it.
Then
So, I mean, look,
the TOP then benefits the other team, not you. You just wasted,
no doubt,
8 minutes
no doubt,
and came away with nothing.
it's great to have Justin Tucker, but you want him to be on the sideline way
Yeah,
more, right? I mean,
you want him kicking extra points, not field goals.
I want him kicking extra points and 50-plus yard field goals. I
Right.
mean, really,
Right.
that's kind of where we're talking.
Right.
And of
You know
course, he's gonna,
right.
he's gonna kick I'm not
No,
saying they're
but
going to
you
score.
don't want them kicking 35-yard field goals on a regular. You're not going to win.
No doubt, no
Not
doubt.
today.
I mean
You're
that.
not going to beat the Chiefs. You're not going to beat those type of teams by not scoring enough points. It is a league that rewards points scored just like any other sport.
Right, right, and that's where I mean we've focused so much on the passing game, and obviously that was a big part of it. And we know that the efficiency that they had in 2019, which I think they were first in passing DVOA. I mean, Lamar had 36 touchdown passes, and he was near the bottom in pass attempts, of qualified quarterbacks. So it just told you how lucrative it was from an efficiency standpoint. But it really does come back to maximizing your opportunities inside the red zone. I mean, you got to score when you're in that red area. You have to score touchdowns, and we know you're not going to do it every single time. But when you looked at how last year profiled, I want to say, and don't quote me on this, these numbers all run together every year after a while. But what they were, you go look at what they were in the red zone the first three games. I want to say it was like 8 of 10 or something, like something crazy, right? And from that point on, they were awful inside the red zone. And even before Lamar got hurt, they were having their issues inside the red zone big time. So you have to get better in that regard. So you have to be able to do everything. And I think again, I'll go back to something that you mentioned as far as space. I'm intrigued to see what this running game is going to look like if you run a little more out of 11 personnel rather
Yeah.
than heavy, heavy, heavy all the time. I think that's something that is kind of the sneaky exciting part about this offense. You can have three wide and have Beckham and Bateman on the outside. You can line up Zay Flowers. You have Mark Andrews as more of an inline tight end, and run from that kind of a formation a little bit more. I mean, you'll
Sure.
get a lighter box, and the J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards in that scenario could really gash some teams there. So
Right.
again, this isn't about like, okay, we're going to be this, we've been this run first, run heavy team, and suddenly we're going to be this pass first, pass heavy team. It's all about balance at the end of the day. And Greg Roman talked about this a lot. And there was a time when they were good at this, but certainly it had been a backslide the last couple of years. That idea of trying to force a defense to defend every blade of grass on the field, wide and deep, right? Every level of the defense, sideline to sideline, goal, line of scrimmage to goal line. And I think, not saying the Ravens are going to be the best offense in football, but I think the moves that they've made put them on the right track to getting back. And again, their offense wasn't in its totality was not lousy last year, but it had some very clear deficiencies. Like you mentioned, tempo was an issue, red zone, and obviously the passing from the time Bateman got hurt. So, it's not as though they didn't have any of these, didn't have any redeeming qualities. They did. The running backs, their running game, tight ends, offensive line, and obviously Lamar Jackson when he's healthy. So now it's just a matter of you've got fresh eyes, a new mind in the mix there, and you've added some pass catching targets. They got to figure out left guard. That's certainly something they have to figure out, but that's something they should be able to figure out without too much problem. And it's go time. Like I said, to me, there are no more excuses to with how many times over the last few years were we saying about this offense? Yeah, but what about when they get down by 10 points? Or what about when they're going up against another offensive juggernaut or, get into one of these shootout type games? To me, they should be much better equipped. And I'm not saying you don't want to fall behind 10 points. You don't want your defense to give up a ton of points. And, hopefully you're not in that position too often. But if you are, how well can you adapt? And I think they're in a position now where they should be better equipped to be able to play that kind of football if they have to.
Well, Luke, also, it seemed to me last year after the Lamar Jackson threw a bad pick against the New York Giants, they dialed it back. I mean, all quarterbacks throw bad picks here and there. It's just the nature of the game, but you don't see them turtle to the extreme that I thought the Ravens did after he threw a bad pick.
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to say, Dennis. I mean the reality is, I mean, from the time Bateman got hurt, I mean, just look at who they were trying
Yeah,
out there
it
at wide
changed.
receiver.
It
I
changed.
mean,
Yeah, you're
it's
right about that.
Demarcus Robinson is a nice
Right.
role player, but he was their number one receiver. But and Duvernay, who started out strong, but I think it was evident he's not a, he's a better number three or a number four. So more of a gadget, complimentary guy. So I think it was everything. And look, I mean, It was time with Greg Roman. And in hindsight, they probably should have just cleared the deck with him like they did with Wink Martindale after 2021. And maybe that might have even helped avoid some of this mess with Lamar Jackson in the standoff with the contract. Who knows? It's water under the bridge now. They've got it worked out. But, it wasn't just a Greg Roman issue. It wasn't. So I think at this point now, you start fresh. You have a new coordinator, some new toys at the wide receiver position. You have a healthy roster on that side of the ball. I mean, Bateman should be easily 100% by training camp, given the timing. Now, just a question of what's he look like? What does Beckham look like? How do they stay on the field? The same questions you say of any player. Any player. I say it all the time. Anyone is durable until they're not anymore. It's a game of attrition. It's a game of a 100% injury rate. You say as you go far enough. So those questions are all there. So nothing's a guarantee. But again, I look at how this thing looks on paper now. It's not a perfect roster, but I do feel like it's a very well balanced roster. Yeah, could still see adding another corner. Could still see adding a veteran edge rusher to the mix. So it's not as though they're perfect, but I do think you look at the balance on this roster, it feels much more balanced than it's been in quite some time, at least, going back 2 or 3 years now.
Well, Luke, by the time this our segment airs, you will have been at the press conference, Lamar Jackson's press conference. Hopefully somebody will ask him how the knee's progressing. I mean, I think it's a fair question. Where is he? Is he 100%? Is he 80%? Is he 85%? Does he expect to be ready for training camp and things of that nature?
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think probably not one of the first questions that's asked, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's absolutely relevant. And, would be curious to know, when were you, quote, and if he is 100% now, when was he 100%? Because look, again, I don't expect the Ravens or Lamar to really get into too much of the dirty
Sure.
laundry. They're going to be asked about it, but I don't expect them to say it. And that's just how it is. I mean, they're going to want to talk about moving forward, whereas there was a really interesting story that played out here that we don't have a lot of details on, with a lot of it. So I don't expect that, but yeah, I think it's fair to know, Lamar, is the knee 100% now? If so, when did it, when did you get to the point where it was 100%? And it's go time, right? I mean, it's certainly it's going to be nice, and it was really refreshing, Dennis, that you and I just spent most of this conversation talking about, yeah, a little bit of the business, but what this team's going to look like on the field, because it was almost
Yeah.
impossible to talk in those terms because you just didn't know. I mean, whether Lamar was going to be traded or signed to an offer sheet, or he's holding out during training camp,
Yeah.
heaven forbid he sits out the season, all those different factors. I'm not saying all those scenarios were likely, but they were non-zero chance scenarios. So you
Yeah.
had to at least acknowledge it, and made it really tough to talk about a left guard or wide receiver or whatever. So it is refreshing to have a resolution, and hey, we'll see how it plays out. As I always said, and this is why I kept pushing back, and Nestor and I talking about this, and whether Lamar was going to be here in 2023 or not, the best outcome was always Lamar Jackson remaining with the Baltimore Ravens. It's really easy to say you're starting over at quarterback until you see whoever that is lining up in September, and you realize that you have Kyle Bowler, or you
Yeah.
have, take your pick of, any young quarterback or even a veteran retread, whatever, and you realize, ooh, this is not only is this not as good as it was with Lamar, but it's not even close to being as
Yeah.
good as it was with Lamar. So,
Yeah.
we'll see how it plays out. I don't, you know, the question comes up, and Nestor presented this to me, and said, am I confident the Ravens are going to win a Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson? I think they've got a really good shot to do it, but there's only really one quarterback now you can point to. I mean, Brady's gone, right? Brady's
Yep.
retired. Matthew Stafford got his, but see what the Rams are at this point. It's Patrick Mahomes. Everyone else is in the same boat. And I mean, I guess if you want to say Russell Wilson, I mean, he won one a decade ago now at this
Sure.
point. He won one, what, a year after Joe Flacco. So, everyone's kind of in that same conversation. And, you know, any quarterback that hasn't won a Super Bowl kind of has that, uh, for lack of a better term, because I think it's unfair, but kind of that loser
Sure.
label side to them, especially as they go on. But, I've reminded, I mean, Peyton Manning was a rookie in 1998 and didn't win a Super Bowl until what, 2006? And, I mean, Lamar's not even that far down the road at this point. So he's got to be better. There's no question about that. And the rest of the team has to be better when they get into January. Because again, you can keep talking about the regular season all you want, but no one remembers that at the end of the day. No one remembers the 2006 Ravens, as far as if someone talks about that Ravens team that's most memorable to you. And I'm guessing as time goes on, people are going to think the same way about the 2019 Ravens, despite the fact that
Absolutely.
they were overwhelmingly the best team, regular season team in Ravens history. I mean, by a long shot. So you got to win games in January and you got to make a deep run and you got to put yourself in that position. I think right now, for me, as the Ravens are currently constructed, I do feel that they're a top 4 team in the divisional round in the AFC that is loaded. And we'll see what happens after that. I mean, they've got to break through. So, Mahomes and the Chiefs are the favorite and remain the favorite until anyone proves otherwise at this point in time. And with apologies to Burrow and the Bengals, they did it once, but it's not as though they have a reputation
Sure.
of doing that multiple times. So everyone else is chasing, but I think the Ravens, with having Lamar Jackson under contract, with the other moves they've made, probably another move or two to come at some point between now and the start of the season, then we'll see how it plays out. But I think you certainly feel way better about this team's chances with Lamar Jackson than you would have without him, and knowing you were starting over at that point.
Oh, no doubt about that, Luke. With that, please tell our listeners where they can find you in WNST, all the great stuff you do up and down the dial for us, and your blog and everything else that you do.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke, as I'll be live from Owings Mills, of course, talking Lamar Jackson press conference, rookie camp over the weekend. We'll get our first look at some of these rookies. We'll get our official undrafted free agent class, which should be pretty large, Dennis, by the way, because of only drafting 6 players. But you can hear all that coverage. Check that out at BaltimorePositive.com. My blog, sponsored by Coons Florida Baltimore. Certainly my latest 12 Ravens thoughts, reaction to the Lamar Jackson press conference, any news and notes from rookie camp. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive Text Service, sponsored by Coons Florida Baltimore. If you are, it was busy the last week or so. Draft picks, news of Lamar Jackson, news of the Rock Ya-Sin signing, any significant local sports news sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive Text Service, sponsored by Coons Florida Baltimore. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Ravens sound from Owings Mills. Be back at the ballpark as the Orioles return home next week. All of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
Luke, as always, I appreciate your time, your insight, and your thoughts. Looking forward to our next segment, and maybe we'll talk about the draft class next week, plus the Orioles.
Sounds good, Dennis. Be well, and I'm not sure this coming week will be quite as eventful as this last one, but there'll still be plenty to talk about, I'm sure.
Absolutely. There it goes. Luke Jones here, 1570 AM. WNST. We'll take a quick break. Come back on the flip side right after this.